So that was a great conversation we had with Harini, and now we have with us Seema, who is going to give us some insights on the nitty-gritty details of some of the things that Harini talked about. So Seema, let's start with conflict. We always have conflict in our lives, but we also hear about human nature conflict, especially outside urban spaces. But do we also have conflict of that kind inside urban spaces?
Yes, definitely. So cities are places with a lot of conflict. But one thing I would like to start by saying is that we have to stop thinking in terms of the binaries anymore of development and environment when we think about conflicts. Because nature in cities has a lot to offer in terms of solutions for urban sustainability challenges or resilience, what we're talking about. So for example, so many of the problems about urban sustainability, like whether it is waste management, water scarcity, flooding, these can all actually be addressed if we incorporate nature into the solutions. So let's take wetlands in cities as an example. We have wetlands that can perform the functions of water purification, and wetlands as large as the East Kolkata wetlands in fact perform multiple functions. That mosaic of land and water, which is extremely beautiful, also supports a lot of livelihoods of local communities. It also is an important ecological space, as a lot of the functions such as water purification, flood mitigation is done by the wetlands. And in addition to it, these are they act as a sewage treatment plant for the city of Calcutta. And one thing, we have been doing some research and interviews there, and people also relate to the wetland in a very personal way. So if we incorporate all this, then our very idea about wetlands will change.
Right.
So as opposed to seeing it as land for real estate and only for development of a particular kind, they can also provide a lot of solutions, what we call as nature-based solutions for urban sustainability challenges that every city almost faces. And this is true for wetlands in any kind of city in India.
Yeah, it's interesting that you should mention wetlands, because I just found out that there are 7 cities in India that like to call themselves lake cities. So obviously we ascribe a lot of importance to these wetlands, and I'm guessing we should do a lot more to preserve them.
Yes.
The other thing we associate with cities is jobs and employment and guarantees of employment. So where does the environment fit into all this?
See, one thing maybe that we have very little of nowadays is an imagination for our cities. So we think of cities only from an economic or an employment generation point of view, but there is actually the opportunity for convergence of employment, economy, as well as the environment. If we are looking at some of the most vulnerable populations in a city, one of the things that we have also trying to explore has been the role of green jobs in urban employment guarantee schemes. We have heard of NREGA, its equivalent in the rural areas, and post-COVID many states have started many employment guarantee schemes. But how can we bring in the elements of nature that can actually build resilience of local people as well as the city as a whole into these jobs? We have some examples from the urban guarantee scheme in Kerala, and how can say a vegetable garden that is grown by local people in plots of land in their localities, how can that contribute to food security? Or how can cleaning of canals, maintaining water bodies help to move away from the cycle of drought and floods that almost all cities face?
Yes.
So Kerala, during the 2018-19 floods, which were really massive, after it they realized that there's a lot of scope for cleaning of canals and water bodies to mitigate the impacts of the floods. And you're performing so many services, nature is giving you so many services, it's contributing to food supply, it's helping make the cities better places to live in, because so much of the population of this country and across the world is going to be living in cities. So
absolutely.
Employment, the 3 E's, employment, economy and environment, definitely can go together in cities.
Yeah, I mean, that's really good to know. And if you think about cities, and our most Indian cities are kind of accelerating in terms of their coverage at a really fast pace. So how do we deal with the border of the city and the rural, where the city meets, as they say, the peri-urban? What impact do cities have on those areas?
The peri-urban interface, that ring around the cities, is a very dystopian kind of a space.
Yes.
It is rural and urban at the same time. So there is a rural population as well as there are rural processes. There is also an urban population and urban processes happening. So inevitably what happens is it falls through the crack of governance. And you have governance systems that are geared, say, to deal with a panchayat level problems. But the issues that these peri-urban interface areas face is very urban problems. And inevitably there is a lot of degradation that happens in this space. So what are the main problems you face? You have waste management as a huge issue. You see all kinds of waste dumps piled around in this area. You have degraded lakes in almost all these in this ring around the cities. So this ecological footprint of the city that is extending into these peri-urban areas and also to an extent into the rural has not been favorable for the environment of these places. But what we need again is the acceptance and the understanding that cities are always going to expand, and there's going to be this dynamic space where you will probably have to have a different kind of governance that is able to incorporate the urban and the rural needs and build infrastructure accordingly that can support this kind of urbanization.
So then it seems to me more of a problem of relationship, because it's almost like nobody thinks that they are responsible for this
a no man's land kind of a place. Yeah. There is some recognition happening of the PUI. It is mentioned maybe in government documents now a little more. There is a little more recognition, but a lot more needs to be done, because this is how cities are going to be expanding, spreading into the neighborhood.
Yes. And then is there scope for kind of concentrating cities, like instead of expanding outwards, kind of going up, or other ways of increasing density?
So whatever way we imagine cities as dense, packed or spreading out, one thing that we have to be very clear about and have an understanding is of the ecological landscape and the geographical location of the cities when we plan it accordingly.
And how do we get people involved in imagining their own city? How do we increase participation of citizens in urban planning?
I think one of the things that makes people want to do something for the city is to develop how they can connect to the city, right? And the connection will happen if by sparking some interest that they already have. So there are different ways. Maybe I am interested in birding. There may be a natural space in my locality, in my neighborhood, that might be of interest to me. Someone else may be interested in heritage. So there may be some local temple or a building that could have some story behind it. So I think stories, narrations, these are a great way of making citizens connect with their immediate landscape, so that when there is some kind of a threat or a possibility of a threat, they will invest their time, resources and energy to come out and protect it. And we have found from our research that history is a great hook. Everybody wants to know, what is the story behind this. It could be a mythical story, it could be folklore, but what it does is generate an interest. And that is something that we found really makes people come out of their homes, come out of their comfort zone and do something for cities, to participate in making cities more sustainable, protect biodiversity and value the cities that they are in.
So what you're saying is, if we want to bring kind of nature back into people's lives, are these the ways to do that? Not through what we think of as, information or being didactic through textbooks.
Nature you have to touch, feel and experience, right? So it's good to know about mountains and oceans which are distant, and forests also which are distant, but it is that lived experience of interacting with nature, being awed by a butterfly or being awed by a plant or a magnificent tree, that is going to make me a votary for it, which is going to make me come out and say, I want to protect this piece of nature in the city because I feel something for it.
And normally when we talk about protecting nature or preserving nature in the city, we always associate it with tree planting. Either trying to cut down trees to widen roads or planting trees to kind of make up for what has happened before, the degradation which has happened before. So what is your take on this? Is tree planting the only way to go, or there are some other ways we can do this?
Tree planting is definitely good. it's a nice feeling to plant a tree. Everybody likes to be
Yes.
associated
Yes.
with having seen a tree planted and grow and become a huge. But just like with anything else, we need to plan very carefully for tree planting. So we need to have an idea about what are the kinds of trees that are there in the city, what are the kinds of species that are necessary and useful, where are these trees present, what is the kind of biodiversity that these trees would like. And based on that, then we should plan for the entire city, find out spaces where you may need new trees planted, and also think ahead. With tree planting, we always have to think like a few years ahead, because we're
Yes.
trying to build a canopy for the city.
Yes.
And normally we hear that when there are development projects, we hear that 60 trees are being cut, but we are planting 60,000 saplings. Now the problem with that is that trees take decades to grow.
Yes.
The benefits that a fully grown tree can provide is nothing compared to what even a sapling can provide. So we need to take all this into consideration when we are planting, and we have to be very careful while planting it. So it's not a frivolous exercise or something that has to be done because you have to meet a certain green cover of the
Target,
city,
yeah.
but something that should be done with as much care as you would any kind of infrastructure or service for a city.
On that note, let's end this episode of Plain Speak. Thank you so much for joining us, Seema. And it was really interesting to get your views and Harini's views on
Thank
this
you.
important topic of resilient cities. And I hope you also joined, got a lot out of our discussion. And please join us for the next episode of Plain Speak, which you will find on the Azim Premji University YouTube channel, where you can press the bell icon for more notifications. Thank you.